Greetings and welcome to Mason Storm's Cookery Channel. On today's episode, we're going to be making some twist-style cheese bread. Stay tuned to see how it's done. For the base of this delicious product, I'm going to be using my pizza dough recipe. 2 teaspoons of salt, 1 teaspoon of sugar, 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast, 2 1/2 tablespoons of olive oil, 1 1/4 cup of warm water, and 3 cups of flour. I'm going to begin this process out by dumping my yeast into the water, giving it a quick stir, and make sure that it comes alive. Because there's nothing worse than that one time when you don't test your yeast and well, you waste hours and you're left hungry. And that always sucks. So now we get out our big mixing bowl and we're going to start doing our dry ingredients. We're going to dump in our flour, and then we're going to dump in our salt and sugar, and then we're going to start mixing it up. And once we get a little bit of a mix going on, and then we're going to add in our oil, and then we're going to start feathering in our water, and this will allow us to kind of complete the process of making a dough. This is kind of a mixing then adding more water thing. And as I start to mix this, I notice it's really starting to stick to the wooden spoon. So I'm actually going to scrape the dough off of the spoon and then start mixing it up by hand, because that seems to work a lot better. Of course, by mixing it by hand, I'm going to knead it on the countertop. So I'm just going to give it a quick clean and then dump it all on there and start kneading it by hand till it starts to come together, which really doesn't take all that long, but it's a lot easier doing it that way than it is to try to get it to mix in the bowl. Unless, of course, you have like an actual mixer, in which case this dough is incredibly easy to make. So for whatever reason, this batch came out a little bit more moist than normal. It was really sticky. So I ended up adding a little bit more flour to it. This could be because I used all-purpose instead of heavy flour, or it could be the measurement mice I used for the water. Normally I use like a cup that you fill it up, and once there's a cup in it, it just flows over the top and then you dump it in. But this time I was using a graduated cylinder, so you fill it up to a line. Now the problem with that is that if you don't look at it in the correct direction, it can hold a little bit more or a little bit less water. Same if you have it on a countertop that's not 100% level. So it is interesting. Well, maybe it's not interesting at all. Once we're done kneading our dough, I'm just going to stick it in a bowl with a little bit of oil in it. Normally I would cover the bowl and throw it in the oven with the light bulb on, and that's usually a nice warm place to allow the dough to rise. But I was actually cooking something in the oven at the time, so that was not an option. So instead I just covered it and put it on the counter, and I waited longer. So I let this rise for about an hour before moving on to the next step. Our next step, of course, is going to be working on the cheese. Got my box grater out, got my cheddar here. I cut off about 2 cups worth of cheddar cheese, and I think that's about the right amount for this style of bread. Maybe a little bit less would be better, like 1 1/2. This is one of those recipes that if you do too much cheese, it basically becomes like a hot grilled cheese sandwich, which might be the angle you want to go for. That actually does sound pretty good, but for cheesy style bread, you want a little bit less cheese. That way it kind of cooks off and then you don't have as much of it, but you do you. And once we're done having fun with our cheese, it's time to move on to the actual creation process. So I'm going to take my dough here, now that it's sufficiently risen. It's massive now. And I'm just going to dump it out on the countertop here. And then I'm going to flatten it out into a nice rectangle of increased proportions. It doesn't take very long to stretch it all out, and once you kind of do the pat down technique and then pick it up and kind of flip it over, it's pretty much stretched out as far as we need it to be. We don't want to overstretch it. We don't want it to be like see-through or anything, but having it nice and stretched is definitely an asset to this process. And of course, once it's all stretched out nice and flat, we get our cheese and we start distributing it evenly across the entire dough piece, as evenly as possible, as I just said. And now we're going to take it and we're going to roll it from one side to the other as tightly as possible. Kind of like we're making a cinnamon bun, but instead we're making a cheesy bun of deliciousness. Although I guess cinnamon buns are also very delicious, and I'm quite partial to them. And once we have it rolled up, we're going to use our dough knife and we're going to cut it from stem to stern, from one side to the other. We're going to cross it over and kind of twist it, and we're going to twist the entire dough loaf to make a nice long spirally cheesy goodness bread. And once we're done getting it all kind of rolled up nice and tight, and then we're going to take it and we're going to transfer it onto a pan. And once we got it on the pan, then we're going to toss it into the oven. Now, I preheated my oven to 350 degrees, and I'm going to cook this for about 30 minutes and then kind of check on it and see what it's like. And it really ballooned up in the oven, so I ended up ripping it in half, and then I got two kind of smaller loaves, and then I cooked it for probably another 15 minutes until it was completely cooked. It was weird to tell how done it was due to the different layers, but once it was cooked, it was really quite delicious, and I did enjoy this. So let me know in the comments below how you make your cheesy, twirly bread, and if you like my content, please like and subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome.